Hello, and welcome to the 25th Williams Research Center Symposium, Recovered Voices, Black Activism in New Orleans from Reconstruction to the Present Day. I'm Jessica Dorman, Director of Publications here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. This year's program is a little different from the symposia we've run in the past, not only because it's taking place in virtual space, but because it's focused on books. And this weekend, you'll have a chance to meet the talented authors whose archival research has resurrected the voices of 19th century Black activists. Afro-Creole poetry in French, Economy Hall, and Monumental are remarkable works of scholarship, true labors of love. But they're not the only books that we've published here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. We have titles as varied as Furnishing Louisiana, a landmark in decorative arts scholarship, to Ernie Cato, Emperor of New Orleans, to a new biography of sculptor Enrique Alferez out this spring. We hope that you will visit the shop at the collection or your favorite local independent bookseller. Read these books, enjoy them, and then reach out. You can visit hnoc.org/books for our submission guidelines. We're always looking for new book manuscripts. Who knows, maybe the next recovered voice will be yours. Thanks so much and enjoy the symposium.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda McFillin, and I'm the programming manager here at the Historic New Orleans Collection. We're delighted to have you all join us today for our session, The Movement Continues, How 19th Century Activism Paved the Way for the Modern Civil Rights Movement. And we're delighted that today's session is co-sponsored by the Tate Center. We're doing things a little bit differently for this session. We pre-recorded this panel discussion, but we will be having a live Q&A with our panelists Lydia Charles and Molly Mitchell after this session, so please stick around for that. We're excited to hear your questions. All weekend, we've explored Black activism in the 19th century. We wanted to conclude our panel discussions this weekend by bringing the conversation from the 19th century through the 20th century and up to the present day, and explore civil rights activism in New Orleans as one long connective thread. To explore this topic, it is my honor to introduce our panelists for today. I'd like to introduce first Leona Tate. Leona Tate is a civil rights pioneer and co-founder of the Tate Center in New Orleans' Lower Ninth Ward. On November 14, 1960, 4 6-year-old girls in New Orleans became the first African Americans to integrate white-only public elementary schools in the Deep South. On that day, Leona Tate, Gail Etienne, and Tessie Prevost enrolled in McDonough No. 19 School at 1509 St. Claude Avenue. A fourth girl, Ruby Bridges, began classes at William Frantz School at 3811 North Galvez Street. In 2009, Tate established the Leona Tate Foundation for Change to help purchase McDonough 19, the school she helped to integrate. Today, she and her partners, Olympic Community Development, are readying the historic landmark building to reopen in spring 2021 as the Tate, Etienne, and Prevost Tate Center, a mixed-use development dedicated to the history of New Orleans public school desegregation, civil rights, and Black life. Her mission for the Tate Center is to create a safe space and community anchor where the public can learn, support, and train for anti-racism activism and social restorative justice. Lydia Charles is a cultural historian focused on the connections between what was and what could be. While working with the Leona Tate Foundation for Change, Charles bundles together her academic training, National Museum and State Historic Site experience, neighborhood economic revitalization background, and heritage tourism skills in service to one project. Quote, I am grateful and honored to help Leona bring her vision for the Tate, Etienne, and Prevost Interpretive Center to life, end quote. Charles holds degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She splits her time between New Orleans and Jackson, Mississippi. Molly Mitchell is the Ethel and Herman L. Midlo Endowed Chair in New Orleans Studies and the Raphael Casimir Professor of History at the University of New Orleans, where she directs the Midlo Center for New Orleans Studies. She is the author of Raising Freedom's Child, Black Children, and Visions of the Future After Slavery. For several years, she has been a member of the Humanities Action Lab Consortium at Rutgers University, Newark, working with UNO students and community partners on international social justice and public memory projects. Her book manuscript, In Progress, is a study of race, photography, slavery, and memory from the 19th century to the digital age. And finally, our moderator for today is Mishio Yamanaka. Mishio Yamanaka is an assistant professor at the International Institute of American Studies at Doshisha University, Kyoto, Japan. She earned her doctorate in history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2018. Her broad research interests are Southern history, transnational history, and digital and public history. She is currently writing a book manuscript based on her dissertation, Separation is Not Equality, the Desegregation Movement of Creoles of Color in New Orleans, 1862 to 1900. She is also developing a project that explores the history of Japanese immigrants in the Gulf South region. I am delighted to have all of you here today. I look forward to hearing your conversations. Welcome, everyone. And Mishio, I turn the program over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mishio Yamanaka. It is my great honor to serve as a moderator for this wonderful panel. The movement continues how the 19th century activism paved the way for the modern civil rights movement. So as Amanda already introduced myself, I want to skip my self-introduction part and I want to get to the discussion right away. Today we have wonderful panelists, Leona Tate, Lydia Charles, and Molly Mitchell. And I would like to listen to their insights into the 19th century and the contemporary activism for civil rights in New Orleans. So I would like to begin this discussion with a very general open question. Leona, Lydia, Molly, please tell us your work and missions at TEP Center and as well as UNO.
Well, the work is coming along, but my mission was, to be honest, it wasn't meant to be what it is now. It started out just to be trying to get a school opened, and I was assured that that building would not be a school again. So I knew it needed to be something educational, and everywhere I went, no one knew the history of that building, not even the Orleans Parish School Board. Some of the members just weren't aware of what happened there. Visiting the local schools here, the children didn't know the history. So my mission in the building is to place this history somewhere where it could be visualized, it can be there for the students to visit, and hopefully visually they'll see it and can understand it just a little bit better.
Wonderful. Lydia, do you want to add a little bit to it?
Well, I mean, Leona is one of the reasons, well, no, the reason why I'm on this project. I'm a historic preservationist by training. My background's in Black cultural studies and US history. And so here's this living icon that I have the opportunity to work with. And she co-owns the building she integrated. In preservation work, that's unique and amazing, and not only a New Orleans point of view, but a national point of view. Preservation work tends to be more antiquated. There's this thing called the standards, which from 1966, but here is Leona taking historic building and making it useful in a disenfranchised neighborhood that she grew up in and that she actually integrated and owns. So I'm just thrilled to be part of that project.
Yes, that sounds very important and great. And I just wanted to add, I think it's also her experience is important in terms of international perspective and in terms of war history as well. It is one of the breaking moment, and as a American history researcher outside the United States, it is one of the important moments that I always need to remind my students how important it is, how groundbreaking that is. So thank you so much. I think I want to turn into Molly now, and I just want to listen to her insight too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can't help but say, listening to Leona talk, I mean, she's carrying on the tradition, the very long tradition in New Orleans of women activists engaged with schools and making schools work for children. And so it's just I'm honored to be on the panel with you, but I love hearing how you explain how the project developed, because that is just, you wanted a school first, and that's fantastic. I direct the Midlo Center for New Orleans Studies, which is named after Ethel and Herman L. Midlo, and Herman Midlo was a civil rights attorney in New Orleans. And so our mission, and a civil rights attorney at a time when it was not easy to be a civil rights attorney, working in the 30s and 40s. And so our mission, broadly defined, is civil rights, but I'm a 19th century historian. And so that includes the antebellum period for me as well. And we do public programming, and we support new scholarship on New Orleans.
Wonderful. Yes, I think Molly brought a very, very important part, that this activism, especially centering around school, has been one of the major characteristics of New Orleans civil rights history. So I think I just want to move on to the next question that I had, which is, how do you rate your own experience and your work with the 19th century activism, and how do you see any similarities or differences between the 19th century activism and the civil rights activism? And do you see any continuum? If so, how? I just want to throw this very big, but I think important question right there.
I guess that's my question. The similarities I see is, like, in the beginning, we were all separated, and by visiting and around the cities with different schools, I see a lot of that going on today. Hopefully.
Hold on one moment. Leona, I think that your audio is off a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know. I see it going in and out. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
No problem.
No, I just see things regressing. We're going back to being segregated in a lot of places, and hopefully the TEP Center can be what I call to energize this, just a way to heal this racism. I feel like we need to just have some dialogue. We just need to talk, and hopefully that'll bring things together. But hopefully, just because the schools are not integrated or none, it's not going to decrease their education. We still need that. If they would just include civil rights in curriculums that they already have, I think we'll be fine. It'll be okay. But children just don't see their culture here right now, and I feel like that's needed to be back in the curriculum some sort of way. I don't know what everybody's curriculum is so different. Everybody's not governed by the same umbrella as we were years ago. But whatever curriculum we have, I'm sure civil rights played some part of it, and I feel like it should be a part of it.
It's so important. If I could follow up with that, they just released a report, or releasing it today, about civics and social studies education, and trying to bring that back. A group in Washington, D.C. is trying to bring that back. And so I think Leona's so right that it's missing, and it's really key to adjust society and to restoring democracy. And until we get that back into the curriculum, we all need to work a lot harder to make that happen. I think that's really critical. But that, I think, is also what activists in the 19th century understood, how important it was, not only to educate children about their so that they could see themselves in their history, but also that schools themselves were so critical to democracy, that was vital, and that just coming out of the Civil War and the end of slavery, that was one of the issues were the schools and how critical they were, and to get it right, to try to get it right in the 19th century. And New Orleans was one of the few cities that did have some successful integrated schools for a time. So we have that's a legacy of ours, and our kids today should know that. They should learn about that, as well as the civil rights era.
And one of the things that Leona and I have spoken about, because there's different learning styles for different children, and having a physical space that they can walk in and physically feel the history, as well as being taught, having discussions with adults, reading texts, so we could reach different learning styles. So we're hopeful for that. But also the ownership. I'm going to go back to that. I mean, after slavery, people wandered and, wanting to learn to read because it was illegal for them to read, but they couldn't own anything. What could you own in certain places? The fact that Leona owns her history, not only her story, but the building, that is something that's been denied to Black folks and disenfranchised people for a very long time. So just in her presence, and as Molly mentioned, telling the story of where she wanted to be a school and how those challenges and those obstacles, but she made it work. So just in telling the story of the creation of the TEP Center, I think will be a benefit to what both Molly and Leona have been talking about just now.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think securing a space for education, teaching, just as Leona said, dialogue, also place for dialogue. Is sometimes we take it for granted, but it's not really, as unless you work for it. And I think it's a great work that TEP promise children to provide. Not just children, but if you think about children, you have to think about parents too and community too. So it's it's a education school places for. I feel like education in school, secure a place for that kind of dialogue and create an open space and safe space for people to engage. So thank you so much for your insight. And I think we've been talking about school and how important it is. So I think we want to kind of focus a little bit more onto that topic. And as I said, schools have been the center of civil rights struggles in New Orleans for really, really long time, since the beginning of the city's public school system. So why schools? Why do you think schools have been the center of the struggle? And how, if you look at New Orleans history from the perspectives of schools, what can you see? What do you see in the history of New Orleans?
Well, it does seem that
She froze. Leona.
We'll see if we can fix it.
There you go.
I think I'm fading out again.
Yeah, that's okay. You're back. You're back.
I don't know. It does seem that schools have been targeted. What's a easier way to eliminate a Black child getting an education? And target the schools. And I find that, I don't know, it's just the way that things just took over. And I must say, this happened, the majority of it happened right after Katrina. And we were such a vulnerable place at that time, till the takeover was just massive. And it was just not good for our kids to come back into. They came back to a culture shock, is what they came back to.
Yeah, it's been 16 years this year.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So a lot of children are actually just don't know schools, what school looked like before Katrina. They lived their entire life in post Katrina New Orleans. What do you think the difference is?
it's another form of division. It was, we don't have schools and you don't go to schools in your district, you don't go to schools maybe with your siblings. Um, our children are going to school in the dark, coming back in the dark. It's not a good environment at all.
Mhm.
Not at all.
Right. So what do you think I think related to our previous questions and discussion, like how do you see your center, um, what's your center's role into ameliorating ameliorate the situation, improve the situation?
Well, the center is gonna share some history of the desegregation of public schools here in the South.
Mhm.
It's gonna share some history of other movements that happen here in New Orleans. But hopefully, we have another organization that's going to be in there with us. They're called People's Institute of Survival and Beyond. And they have been all over the world over 40 years doing undoing racism workshops. And we will have that. And to me, it's mandatory for someone that's affiliated with the TEP Center to go through this workshop. We have to have some kind of workshop in order for it to work. So People's Institute will be initiating their undoing racism workshops and what they call a communiversity, where they're going to house kids from kindergarten through high school with undoing racism program. And we look forward to that. We're looking forward to that. With our community and in the community where the building's located, it's necessary. It's really necessary.
Mm. Do you want to add, Lydia?
As I said, no, Leon, I mean, I just sit and listen to Leona just like you all are. Mhm.
And I think a huge, what I'm so excited about the TEP Center myself, and seeing what comes of it going forward. I love the child-centered nature of it, which so as a historians are finally coming around to the fact that K-12 is a really kind of essential piece of what we do. And sometimes, academic historians at universities haven't been as engaged as they should be in K-12 work. And so it's so exciting to hear about a new project like this. Working with my own students in public history, we are trying to do what we can to tell the stories, amplify the stories that the general public should know in New Orleans, but children in particular. So I have my students working on trying to figure out ways to reach kids where they are on their phones, maybe, doing some Instagram, some TikTok, things like that. They're working with the public library this semester. Basically what we've done is take the list of all the names nominated for a street renaming recently, which is an ongoing initiative with the city. There were a lot more names than there were streets to be renamed. And so we started with that list, and then we decided to focus on women. And so I'm getting a bit of education myself as a 19th century historian about women, particularly women in civil rights in the 20th century in New Orleans. And so we're trying to figure out ways to just get these stories in circulation in the way that we can. We don't have a TEP center, but we can try to put the stories out there, try to suggest places for people to go to learn more, like the library, like the TEP center, those
We're
kinds of
always
things.
open for partnerships.
Yes, I know. I want to talk to you so much.
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk to you because this is really, the time is now. It's a really critical moment right now. See that happening at all sort of levels of the city, and with institutions and developing programming and K-12. We need to seize the moment because it won't always be here, unfortunately, but it's here right now.
I just want to see it all in one place. I've had college students come into get information to write reports on this, and they're running all over the place
Mhm,
trying to get a few questions answered. And
mhm.
hopefully, I don't know where we're gonna fit all this in this building, but we're gonna try and have somewhere where they can come and find that information and not have to run all over the world to find it.
Yeah.
Just- yeah.
And Leona has talked about having interactives, and the fact, Molly, you talking about the opportunity to have online resources. We've been also working with some other universities. I mean, even our lovely moderator has talked about the importance of an international scale. So we're looking at K-12 locally, we're looking internationally, and all of that. People are on their phones, even more so since COVID. So how we're learning um, is different. And so how we're creating exhibitions is different, how we're doing programming is different. We have a building, but that building can also expand out into cyberspace, and our partners are going to help us do that.
We're gonna talk. Let's talk.
Mhm.
Oh, yes.
Wow. I mean, so we yeah, that all wonderful. And yeah, Lydia, I really appreciate you take global audience into perspective. You don't,
Absolutely.
yeah, especially in the days of COVID, the international travel is very, very nearly impossible right now. So you know, bringing some of your work into online space is very important to reach, you know, audience, um, an audience that you probably never thought exists too. And it's the possibility is endless. So I really appreciate it. Um, I think I also we talk a little bit about women's contribution, and I so that's one of the questions that I had, and I wanted to ask you all. That women activists have played significant roles in history in general, also, in particular the history of New Orleans, but their achievements or contributions are not all, you know, are not recorded or appreciated well in public memory in the city. So I just wanted um, to throw this question to see what your idea is and what you know about women's contribution and girls' contribution to civil rights movement.
I mean, there are so many. I can remember one in particular that was really like a liaison person, or was like a surrogate mother to us, you know, and helping our parents go through the situation for us to integrate the schools. You know, women were kind of like pushed on the back burner for a little bit, but those that did do something, it was great. It was great. Know the women that did the freedom bus ride, you know, and they had to be some strong women to even attempt to do something like that, you know. But I look at our parents, our mothers, you know, that was a courageous act. It was a courageous act.
Well, and to the question about why they, you know, those stories are not, and there's those sacrifices by those women are not in sort of public memory the way they should be. I do hope it's getting better, but we have a long way to go because there are so many women who were incredibly active. Not, you know, women school teachers, but also women who, you know, were not only teachers but organizers and started teachers unions and kept teachers unions going. Even before the civil rights movement started, there were women. You know, if you look at Sylvanie Williams and Veronica Hill, who helped organize the McDonough Day boycott in 1954. I mean, their names, children in New Orleans should know these names, and of course they're going to learn them. But I think it's getting better. But I do. It's sharing with young students these histories of struggles for social justice are so important for them to understand where we are today. It's critical that we share these stories. And that's why I think the TEP Center is so important. It's going to be a place where they can go and hear these stories.
Right.
And that children that are geared towards children, they will be able to hear these stories and learn about these women. And hopefully that, one day will not be the case that women are underrepresented in these stories about the civil rights movement the way they are now.
And I wanted to say something about historiography and the academy, because that's something that we're, how 19th century, 20th century, 21st century. In the 1970s, you have Leon Litwack and Levine, and then the 80s, you have Foner, who I'm sure is going to be discussed this week at some point. And then we have places like your center here in New Orleans, Molly, and then the TEP Center. So those stories in the academy, I mean, anybody who's gone to graduate school, so everybody in the audience who's listening to this, including professors, be more open to different types of historiography and papers that students want to write. Jackie Hall, I don't know if you said it, but I mean, those are the academics, those teachers from K to 12, but also who are making the policies, who are hiring at the universities. Having these kind of stories have legitimacy and authenticity at the academy level is just as crucial. And people who want to become historians. So that's why these kind of symposiums are important, but public history, traditional history, however you want to use it, I think that's really a conversation that has to happen outside of the university, outside of cultural centers, that history is authentic, that it's real and is important to everyday life. So that's to you all out there who's listening.
Well, thank you. Do you want to say something to Lydia's comment, Molly?
No, I was just agreeing with what she's saying. I mean, that's key to what students learn in college and then take on with them into the world and in K-12 as well. I think that having women write the history makes a big difference. And so having more academy that represents the whole diversity of this country, we're still a long way away from that, but that's really key to these stories becoming more well known.
Yeah, as an international academic, Lydia's point is just, yeah, it's very important, right? It's just right on there, it's just right. And to add to her comment, I think the student don't have to wait to get to college to get to know those history. They can start right away from where they are, and they absolutely don't have to wait, and they can start their own. And if there is a center like TEP where they can come in and explore their own history, it would be easy step for them to get to know their local history and how how their ancestor made them stand where they are now. So I want to throw a little bit. I just want to go deep a little bit into this public nature of your work. And as Molly said, women's contributions are still sort of buried in public memory, and we don't get to talk about in women's contribution in general. And then there are more people who we definitely need to remember, but also at the same time we don't discuss them that often. So I think my question is, what do you need to explore? What do you need to uncover these people's voices?
And that's where the dialogue comes in. We need to know who they are. We need to do that research, find where they are or what they did, and just bring that in to the surface. I'm sure that there's a lot, and I really feel like there's a lot. There is a lot. And that's my thing. A lot of people just don't do their research. You know, I think I'm fading in and out again. And
We can hear you.
Just a
okay,
tad, but
okay,
we can still, yes, we can still hear you.
right. But I think if we do the research, we're gonna find, and while we're doing the research, we will be finding a lot of stuff that women did. And
I think the interactive component that you're talking about with the exhibits at the TEP Center and just generally finding innovative ways to make learning interactive for kids, particularly around social studies and history, so that they have some stake in the stories that they're learning about, right? That ways of sort of doing a little research themselves, giving them a little agency in terms of reading up on the people that have come before, I think is really, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity that we have now that we, you know, with technology and things, there are ways you can be innovative with education and really get the students engaged in learning using primary documents. I work with a project called Freedom on the Move, which is collecting fugitive slave advertisements, self-liberating people from before the Civil War. And that's one of the challenges before us. And we've had so far with the work we've done with K-12, that's been the most enlightening thing, is that if you present historical material to children in a way where they feel like they're discovering something, they're learning stories for the first time that they've discovered, it goes a really long way to keeping their interests, keeping them wanting to learn more. And I think that is one pathway to getting these stories out there is to bring the kids along with you, right? To put them in the research, get them active in research.
something simple as I think we did students that were coming to visit the Lower Ninth Ward Living Museum. We did a scavenger hunt, you know, and oh, and they were interested. They really were helpful to themselves and try to find the answers to the questions that was right in their faces, but it was just fun for them, you know. But if that's the way they got to learn, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if students actually work to do stuff, they don't forget what they did. So
Right.
it's much better than, you know, making a list of historic figures in New Orleans and try to remember their names one by one. It's if you actually work to you know their history, then you know you better understand. You take it inside your heart and then never forget. So I think it's one way to approach for better education and for better future. Yeah. Lydia, do you want to add?
As I said, I'm just a bobblehead. I'm agreeing with everything that people have been saying. And I mean, this is the other thing about history. When people talk about history, oh, you're a historian, what do you do? Giving people the opportunity to learn what history is and how it can affect their life, and they don't have to just be a historian. History infuses our entire culture, how we behave, how policy is made, how neighborhoods are developed, who gets what, who doesn't get what, all of that's rooted in history. And so having those conversations, having that space, making it relevant to the young people, but also how they communicate with their parents or how parents communicate with them, different generations. That's again what we're hoping for the TEP Center is it allows for that. Just walking the grounds and talking about what was it like to go to first grade, Grandma? Those kind of questions, those don't happen. We don't make time for those anymore. So we've been talking about technology, which is very important in 21st century, but also having that space of quiet space. Also how we learn, how our brains take in information, having that physical sense, that we're also going to be able to offer at the TEP Center.
Feel like this ubiquitous nature of center is very, very important for not just children, but for the community. So I really appreciate your insight. One last question, if I may. I think my question is building on to what we have discussed so far. But one thing we haven't discussed is the tourist industry as a global international researcher myself. I just cannot help asking this question. The New Orleans attract so many people across the globe. I'm not sure now because of the pandemic, but usually New Orleans always attract international visitors, and including Japanese, tourists too. But at the same time, I know from my own experience that New Orleans Black history and its complexity have not really represented well by tourism industry. They just probably learn the surface and that's it. So how do you want international tourists understand the long history and tradition of Black activism in New Orleans? And if there's any way that you can help us understand the significance of Black history in New Orleans?
Well, from experience, I've seen tourists come in just to see the area where the TEP Center will be located. And everybody has heard about the lower Ninth Ward after Katrina. So people are still looking to come see that. And then when they find the museum that we've been running, it's a whole nother world for them, and I think hopefully that's the way we'll
No, I want to keep
There she
listening
goes.
to her, please.
Coming back. Oh, no. Well, so as Leona's saying, so she's talking about the Living Museum, which is in Lower Ninth. Here she goes. Here she comes.
Oh, she's back now.
lost me again, huh? Okay. Yeah, and the Lower Ninth Ward is just a 6-room house in the Lower Ninth Ward Living Museum, and I know we've seen over 15,000 people there in a year's time, and we always ask, well, how did you find us? Because we didn't advertise, and they just Googled Lower Ninth Ward and it came up, and the reviews were so high, it attracted a lot of people. And hopefully the TEP Center will do the same thing.
Well, it's such a, I know this isn't your question, Mishio, because you're asking about tourism, but thinking about the Lower Ninth Ward Museum, how embedded it is in the community, that is something very special that you don't see with a lot of museums. It's in a tradition of neighborhood museums, but it's that, and I know the TEP Center is the same way, right? It's so much a part of the community and the neighborhood, and for a historical institution to be that way instead of being sort of, cold and, sort of a separate space, it's fantastic. It's just it's a different kind of sort of living space, which I think what every museum should strive for. It's really wonderful. And I'll say also that we struggle in New Orleans between doing what we do for tourists and doing what we do for the community in terms of telling the history of this city. And I do think it's time, while the tourists are gone, we have some time to focus on our community and telling these stories for them. And then when the tourists come back, they'll be there. Those stories will be there for them to learn about. But I just think it's a sad but a special opportunity in that regard, in terms of revisiting the city's history and what it has to teach us.
I'm going to plug one thing. There's going to be an annual program month at the TEP Center called May at TEP. At least that's what we're planning on. And one of the reasons why we're doing that is for three. Number one, there was a boycott of Black families in 1954 for against McDonough Day, where Black children had to dress up and march, and the Black parents decided, no, we're not going to do that. And then, so that's May 7th. Then we're going to be honoring the parents and the families of the children who integrated schools around Mother's Day. And then Brown v. Board's anniversary is May 17th. So those are three areas that will always be in March, May. But the other thing is we want to reach out to those who come for Jazz Fest, which is always the last weekend of April and the first weekend of May. So if you want to extend your stay, because we have international travelers who come into Jazz Fest every year, and musicians and so forth that they can then come to the Lower Ninth, come to the TEP Center, and really experience New Orleans outside of downtown and Gentilly. So that's kind of why, in terms of how we're programming for an international audience who would be coming to town, we know that every first weekend of May. So that's my little plug.
Well, wonderful opportunities. I wish I were in New Orleans so that I could join all. So I will
come anytime.
Yeah,
Anytime.
Thank you. Are some of the events will be held online this year?
We're working on that. We're working on that because the building's not going to be open until the summer. But in online, we will have some online exhibits and different programs that are going to start sooner than the building opens. But we'll let folks know.
Wonderful, wonderful. I would love to know. Yeah, very exciting. I wish we can continue our discussion for a little longer, but the time has come, so we need to end this discussion. But this has been a wonderful discussion, and now we will head into Q&A. And thank you all for coming. And during the Q&A session, Lydia and Molly are going to answer any question you may have. So thank you so much.
Hello, thank you all for that wonderful conversation. And now it is time for the Q&A. I believe Molly and Lydia are with us. So if you want to turn on your cameras and your mics and we can get started. I know we have a few questions here. Hi. Perfect. Hi. Well, thank you all for that wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it so much. And we have some Q&A, but to kick us off here, here's a question I'd love for both of y'all to weigh in on. Mishio brought this up in the conversation about honoring Black women activists over time. This past year, the New Orleans City Council created a commission to make recommendations to rename city streets and parks that are currently named to honor white supremacists. Going back to Mishio's question about recognizing the contributions of Black women activists, several of the proposed street name changes honor Black women activists such as Doris Jean Castle, Eleanor Pete, Julia Aaron Humble, Leontine Luke, Veronica Hill, Diane Mamadi, French Cole, and I'm going to throw in a quick plug for Sylvanie Williams too. I don't know if she, maybe she was on the list at one point, but Molly, I love Sylvanie Williams. And so Molly, my question for you is if you could just highlight a couple of these women and talk a little bit more about their work. And then Lydia, will jump over to you and just talk about the significance of renaming the streets and what this means for our city.
Sure. So first I would encourage everybody to go, I could put the website in the chat when I stop talking, but to go to the website for the Street Renaming Commission. They've posted the final report for now on their website. So you can go and read the sort of proposed name changes. You can also read the public comments, et cetera. And so it gives you very short bios of people, but you can sort of get started there. And sort of more broadly, I would say, of course, women were very involved in education. Sylvanie Williams, I'm not sure what I think maybe she was on an earlier list, Amanda, but in terms of being involved in children's education very early on, Sarah Towles Reed and Veronica Hill also very involved in education, but also the rights of teachers. which is incredibly important. They were real pioneers in establishing teachers unions in the South and pushing for women's rights within those teachers unions. For instance, the ban on married women with Sarah Towles Reed. So certainly education is a very important area of women's activism and shouldn't be forgotten and is often forgotten. And I think part of that forgetfulness has to do with women's roles in labor organizing. So you also have Eleanor Pete organizing the Domestic Workers Union. So, and I had made this list for myself before we started talking, just because you can't necessarily see the chronology in the street listings. But if you look at the chronology of this women's activism, starting from before the Civil War, the women that are on the list, and actually I think the earliest woman is Margaret Elizabeth, who was a freedom-seeking, self-liberating, enslaved woman who ran away from her enslaver in 1861 somewhere near City Park. And if you can start with Margaret Elizabeth there and go all the way through Sylvanie Williams, late 19th century, early 20th, Eleanor Pete, also early 19 teens, Sarah Towles Reed, Veronica Hill, the 20s and then the 30s, and through the 50s, and you get up to the 60s and the Civil Rights Movement. So Black women in New Orleans were never not activists. They were activists continuously, and the activism that we see today, which is sort of the theme in this panel, is a continuation of that activism. It's not, there's no sort of lull, say, between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights era. Women are doing amazing and arguably radical things in between that time, but they have not gotten the recognition they deserve. And hopefully the street names will be a step in the right direction so that people will be curious and want to know more.
Absolutely. Lydia, do you want to comment on that?
And Molly just said something that is a goal for me in the work that I do at the TEP Center, but just writ large, because the answers are not going to be history. And I'm sorry that I'm fuzzy, y'all, but I'm in a studio space and I'm just like literally like an attic. Anyhow, but you can hear me. Is that you cannot get all the answers at the TEP Center, but with me as an academic or a student, it's about curiosity. So what Molly just said, what we experience and what we are presenting at the TEP Center when we're reading a book, it's to have families, students, and adults ask the questions so that they're leaving and that they're going to go explore more and go to the website that just Molly answered. It's like, oh, I didn't know this existed. Because there's really, I mean, the way that history is taught, and I'll get to the street naming in a second, the way history is taught, and I'm a horrible student, is because I don't remember names, I don't remember dates, but I'm a historian. So people, it's like, well, how does it, because I like these kind of trends and theories, and that's what I'm drawn to. So when you're naming things, it's about who names it and why they're naming it and when they're naming it. So we're in a historic point in time that we're renaming things to recognize and elevate, as Molly said, these women who have contributed to the history of New Orleans that had been pushed to the side. So when Amanda mentioned kind of my background as a city planner, is that who names it? You know, who puts the, who owns it? That's usually who names it. So we're at a place now that we're kind of recognizing that, well, what's contributing to the establishment of New Orleans? It's all of these different stories. It's the work that's being done. It's not just who has the biggest paycheck or who can write the check, but who's actually contributing to the work, to the longevity, to the sustainability of what New Orleans is. And the other thing that I love so much is that it's not just compartmentalized to neighborhoods. There's a joke that Chris Rock talks about, and I've kind of written a paper about where MLK streets are in cities, because in the 70s, 80s, like these MLK streets are just kind of plopped in Black neighborhoods across the country. But this is around New Orleans. This is all these neighborhoods and all these histories are all interwoven. It's not like this Black person or Cesar, because from California, Cesar Chavez streets were also named every place. It's that all of these names, and it's not just those in necessarily high esteem in the history books, but the women on the ground
when you're walking the streets, you have a TEP center, or you have Leona, Tate, Gail Etienne, and Tessie Prevost, who walk the streets and now own the building, and the building is named after them. So it's the ownership, it's the naming of it, it's the creating of this neighborhood cultural anchor that will last beyond Leona, Gail, and Tessie, and beyond all three of us here on the panel. So that's what's really exciting for me on this particular project.
Absolutely. Here's a really interesting question here, and it goes back to a lot of what y'all have been talking about during this panel discussion. This one says, this is from a teacher. She says, my middle school students are very interested in studying women's and Black history and social studies. I find the most resistance in learning with adults. As a hopeful future teacher and adult educator, how do you suggest working with adults to encourage childlike curiosity and open-mindedness?
Well, I mean, I guess I teach adults for a living, so I should know. You know, I do think I have two minds about this. Certainly, I teach college students, and at UNO, I teach non-traditional college students who are increasingly the typical college student. A lot of those discussions start at a place where they say, I never learned this in school. Why didn't I learn this in school? And that is the starting point in many cases for their curiosity and for their desire to learn more, is simply that they didn't get these stories before. And I think, you know, if you've been part of this symposium, if you look at Brian Mitchell's book, Monumental, and also Fatima Sheikh's book, they both start at a place where they were not learning in school what they knew from listening to family, those stories that they learned at home, and they're not learning them in school, and not seeing those translate into sort of official histories. And so I do think that that is a point where you can often start with adults, to get them engaged and involved and interested.
I agree exactly with Molly saying it, you know, making it current. And I said I'm a bad student, and a lot of reasons I'm a bad student because as I said, I don't remember how history is taught. I was not like the tests, and so that's what we think of when, as an adult, what it means to be a historian. And people run away from that. So how do you create that space so that they're asking questions that's relevant to them? And as Molly just mentioned, we learn stuff in our neighborhoods from our families that are not in the history books or not in the museums, and giving it legitimacy, and then being able to go and question that. And it's not about pointing fingers. It's about, again, asking questions. Methodology, I hate that word, but what does it mean to be a historian? And that's actually quite interesting. It's not about just memorizing, but it's about working through problems. We've been here before. So what has worked in the past? What has not worked in the past? That's history too. And that's not taught in the classroom necessarily. I'm sure Molly actually, I would love to take Molly's class. But a lot of professors, it's just, here's the book, here are the things you have to memorize, and I'm going to test you at this quarter, and then what's your final grade's going to be. And that's opening. The profession is changing a bit, and even having symposiums like this, Historic New Orleans Collection, having this is part of changing that dynamic in how we're thinking about history.
I think that the question also picks up on something else, which is we don't often describe teachers as frontline public historians, but that's what they are. And the adults who didn't learn those stories in school had teachers who were not, giving them perhaps the full story because they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the wherewithal, what have you. But that is the case, and so that is also the most radical place to start. Whether you're talking about teaching adults or teaching children in the classroom, is your biggest opportunity to change what people understand about the past and what they choose to remember.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of questions here about the TEP Center, Lydia. this is Anne, she says, how will locals in the Lower Ninth Ward be able to participate and support the Pet Center?
Well, although our introduction that the TEP Center was scheduled to open this spring, it's going to open in the summer because we're in New Orleans and hurricane had some roof damage, and we all know about that, and an insurance company. So anyway, we've been delayed. So it's going to be opening this summer, but you can go to tepcenter.org. And those are going to be some resources for programming. If you want to donate, please, always need money. But the Lower Ninth, one of the things, and Molly had mentioned this, I don't remember if it was it was during the recording. It really is a neighborhood, it's a neighborhood anchor. It's not just something that's being plopped into the Lower Ninth, but it is a symbiotic, organic structure that's going to be in the Lower Ninth beyond all of us. So it's going to be open. We're going to have membership, and it's going to be a cultural space. So the programming will be locally oriented. It's not, even though I've mentioned about tourists and I've mentioned Jazz Fest in the recording, that's not our primary audience. Our primary audience is New Orleans, and that was Leona's vision. Her first thing was, how do you get civil rights information into New Orleans public schools? That's her number one vision. And that, if we do that really well, and this is something that I've worked with other museums, for local museums, if you can really connect with and get the local folks involved, then you're also educating beyond the locals. But the locals should be your first priority, and so that's where we are. And so yes, please, tepcenter.org, be involved that way. I'm going to be opening in the summer, and yeah, come visit.
That's great. And we'll drop that in the chat so people can click on the link if they want to go visit. And I hope they do. We're so excited about the TEP Center opening this summer. I personally can't wait to get over there, but I know it's going to be such a wonderful thing for our city. And I love hearing that your focus is on locals as well. That's wonderful. We are running out of time, but there's one more question I want to pose to both of y'all. We, the title of this program is bringing the conversation about activism from the 19th century all the way to the present day. So how does studying past movements, past activist movements, civil rights movements, help to inform activist efforts in New Orleans today?
Oh, me. Well, I think it's incredibly important as a foundation for any activist organization to understand, where their what the history is, that they're the space, the historical space in which they work, and that they are not out there alone, and they are not the first people to raise issues about social justice and equality. It's empowering to understand that. And certainly, probably young people get involved in contemporary issues without having that foundation, without knowing it. And once they learn it, it is incredibly empowering. They feel like there's a whole sort of army of people behind them in their struggle for contemporary social justice. So that's why I think it's so important. And I also think it's important, sort of broadly speaking, sort of for collective memory, for sort of empowering everybody in New Orleans to understand that there's this long history of social justice movements in this city, arguably more than almost any other Southern city. New Orleans was ground zero for so many justice movements, for some of the most radical legislation to come out of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And that really shouldn't be forgotten. I did see a question in the chat about memorializing civil rights pioneers in New Orleans, and is there an organized effort? And I don't know, organized effort is the right phrase, but it is happening, and it is an ongoing conversation. There are some street names, for instance, being suggested, like Dejun, Oscar Dunn. Those things, changes are happening. What was Lee Circle is proposed to be Egalite Circle, which is a concept that is supposed to encompass justice movements from the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, which is a flexible kind of thematic name for that circle. So those things are happening, but it's a process the whole city's going through and will continue to go through.
I just want to say that because as a child, you read about these luminaries and these icons and these pioneers, and I knew that I wasn't going to be that. And that's okay. So everybody in the audience, every day what you're doing, whether it be being authentic, being truthful, asking those questions, you're activists too. It's not necessarily, I'm an introvert. So going out in the street and protesting in the traditional way, that's not my comfort zone. But when I see something that's inappropriate, when I see something that's missing, speaking out, that makes you an activist. My name may not be remembered 10 years after I'm dead, but that's okay, because again, in the community in which I'm working, that it becomes stronger because it's a collaborative effort. That's activism. And I tell that to my students all the time, you don't do it because you want to get your name on a plaque. You do it because it's the right thing to do. Because Leona, Gail, and Tessie had no idea that 60 years later, there was going to be there'd be so many things. So just do right, be authentic, and learn and ask those questions, go with your gut. What is the story that you heard with your grandmother? How does that apply to something else on the street? Why is the street named this? How is this being changed? That's activism too. Just being a curious intellectual person, that's being an activist. So come and visit the TEP Center, visit our website. And as Leona said in the recording, this is a place for dialogue. The answers are not going to be ready, but it's a conversation, because that's how we learn. And that's activism.
Thank you both so much. And Lydia, that was such a perfect thing to end on, because I feel like this has been a weekend of incredible dialogue, and our audience has been wonderful at submitting really thoughtful questions. So thank you both for being here today, for doing our Q&A. Thank you to Leona, Tate, and Mishio Yamanaka for joining us earlier for the panel discussion. Oh, yes, Lydia?
I just want to say, Leona is very sad. I meant to mention this beginning, that she's missing this, but she's actually being interviewed for civil rights things right now, which is why I'm in this attic. So she's doing other things, but she says, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for participating in this.
That's wonderful. That's great. I'm so, I hope all that goes well with her. Please extend our best wishes to her, and I hope her interview goes well. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We have one final session for this weekend symposium. It's at 4 p.m. It's a Meet the Authors. You'll be able to meet Brian Mitchell, Fatima Sheikh, and Clinton Bruce. So please join us for those. If you have questions for them, we'd love to see you. And everyone, we'll sign off for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.